Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Boundaries and Belonging podcast, an arts-based approach. I'm your host, Magdalena Karlick.
You need all the voices.
To recognize someone's truth doesn't mean you have to invalidate somebody else's.
No one knows everything, including the instructor.
As educators, how do we support the experience of belonging in our classrooms?
When you allow yourself to be as human as possible, that's when you can really connect.
You are welcome to challenge where the edges are.
When I'm in the classroom, I'm going to be who I am.
My responsibility is to push the boundaries of what we know and what we do.
This is the Boundaries and Belonging podcast, where I interview educators from around the United States who are teaching the next generation of arts-based therapists. So I am really excited to welcome Cashel Campbell to the Boundaries and Belonging podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to hearing about how your professional and personal experience inform you as an educator and your practice as an educator. You are a dance movement therapist located in New York and a guest teacher at Adelphi and Pratt Institute and Sarah Lawrence College. I would love to start with hearing how boundaries, like thinking about boundaries and how that informs your teaching practice, as well as where does belonging show up in this work as an educator in a classroom or virtual or in person?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me and inviting me. This is refreshing. I'm always interested in engaging in new thought and conversation and dialogue about this work and these topics. So I'm happy to be here. And how broad, wow. I think the first thing that comes to my mind from the belonging part is how much school in its design versus its intention at times is a place for belonging, whether I realize it, you realize it, they realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the complexities around human beings and the nature and tendencies of what happens when groups of people get together dictate the feelings that often are created as it relates to belonging or not belonging.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that institutions are at best really designed to create a sense of belonging is something that I've been sitting with, particularly this semester, quite a bit, and seeing how it shows up in my professional, personal life and within the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I think boundaries have a very similar constitution. Both of these things, I'm a dance movement psychotherapist, a creative arts therapist, so I work a lot within the embodied experience, the somatic experience, the tactile and the non-tactile parts of our being as humans. And one of the things that the boundaries, I think, offers in the lived experience, again, is this design of structure, this design of safety. Even the institution itself is in a building. That's a boundary. And that boundary comes with ID. It says that you can be on the campus or not. So I think that, there's this unknown part of both boundaries and belonging that has physical representations in the world. And I think that's more favored for cognitive thinking, for ego thinking. But I think that really the necessity for the human experience is about the internal experience of that, the integrative experience of that. So I know that's a large, but that's just how I feel it in me.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Because it is a large question, and it's both like a macro question, like you answered it, as well as micro, interpersonal and internal, and how, as educators, how do we support the experience of belonging in our classrooms, and also how do we implement, communicate about, model boundaries as well, like this. And sometimes, as we all know, boundaries can be not received well, right? Because maybe it's not the expansiveness or perhaps the entitlement that somebody else is used to or wants. So I just appreciate the macro and the micro around boundaries and belonging, because it's just woven throughout this work.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious if you want to tell us a little bit about your journey to become a teacher in these fields, and yeah, what that's looked like, what you love about it. Yeah, anything that you want to share.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I went to Pratt Institute in undergrad, not undergrad. I went to SUNY Purchase in undergrad, and before that, I went to Nassau Community College. And I have to say, I didn't start off as a person or an educator with some grand desire to be an academic, a teacher. None of that was in my realm of thinking. Although my first vision board that I did, I think I was about 24. And I remember taping a college graduation picture on this board, but at that point I had already graduated undergrad and I had no intentions of going to graduate school. And so I remember, I always think about that because I'm like, I didn't plan on any of this. I remember when I chose that picture, I was like, what are you putting that there for? You're not going back, you know? But you know, maybe my spirit, I'm sure my spirit knew something deeper.
Yes.
You know, I sought out to become a therapist because I had been in therapy and I had had a very charted course of my own, and I recognized how beautiful the therapeutic space was, and how possible and how freeing it was. A young woman that grew up in an environment that was suburban and multicultural to a degree, and but representation in the 90s, which is when I grew up, was not a thing. You know, it was this very like colorless, I look at like a dissociative response to racism from the 30 years that preceded the time. Yeah. And it had its benefits in one way. We all enjoyed the same music and hip hop and Green Day alike. And so that's one end of like, you know, cultural immersion and non-distinction. And on the other end, to me, it left a lot of loopholes about my identity. And I think therapy was a place that I was offered an opportunity to find my identity as not only a woman, a Black woman, as a person, as a sensitive, an HSP, a highly sensitive person. So I found that space just very freeing, and I didn't know it was a space. And so then I wanted to go out and do the same. And so I went to Pratt Institute for my grad degree. And I remember, funny enough, because this is something that just landed for me recently, is how much Pratt offered me belonging. And I hadn't had those words. It's a good thing we're having this interview today, because I actually landed on that knowledge last week.
Wow.
It really kind of, I mean, I think I felt it, I knew it, but for it to like escape my mouth, I think that I landed on that last week and really had a very deep emotional experience about the gratitude I had for the people that I met in my program there in creative arts therapy, dance therapy, the teachers that I had, the mentors that I had, the provocation for thought, the challenge. I felt like I belonged in a way that I had been yearning for and didn't really know existed, but hoped for. And so I think when that happened during my studies and prior to my studies, so post undergrad and pre and during graduate studies, I was a dance teacher. I taught belly dance. I taught sensual movements, burlesque, you know, a lot of different things, pole. And I had a passion for teaching when I was teaching dance. I was so excited to be a part of people's body stories And all of these people would come into class, and it was so rich. I mean, they would leave the class and they'd be like, oh my God, I feel community. I'm remembering parts of myself that I forgot. I look forward to this. This is the highlight of my week. I mean, and I have chills. I was like, oh my God, this is so great. Who knew, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that once I found that sense of belonging at Pratt, it was this natural eureka that kind of came in when I graduated, where I was like, I want to teach, because I had the experience of teaching in movement from before, and then the sense of belonging and these theoretical approaches and understandings about psychology, the body and the brain, the body, and emotion and spirit. And I was like, I want to teach. And so one of my teachers at Pratt, I hope she's okay that I say her name, Joan Wittig. She was one of my teachers. And she really challenged me quite a bit when I was learning. And I appreciate her challenging me because it brought out the best in me. And so I had went to her, you know, a year or two after I graduated, or maybe that same year, and said, you know, I have an interest in teaching. If you ever would allow me to come and, you know, sub a class or guest teach, I would really love that. And she was like, sure, yes. And so for a couple of years, I would sub classes for her, and you know, and simultaneously I was working clinically, working in for the state of New York. I worked in New York City Health and Hospitals in Rikers Island. I worked at Kingsbrook Jewish Medical, palliative care with children and babies. So I was doing a lot of clinical rounds, and you know, she kept inviting me, and it was so encouraging because, you know, the credentials needed to teach I didn't have in place yet. I was still working on that. And so once my credentials came through, I was able to apply to positions in more than one institution, and was very pleased and grateful that they said yes. And it's been that since then. It's been a very rewarding and rich experience, not just for it's an assumption for what the students feel. Can't speak for them, but I know for me, I feel so honored, blessed, and informed by being able to witness people have their internal lights turned on and be inspired to be versions of themselves that they didn't know existed.
I really resonate with so much of what you shared, from finding or experiencing belonging as a student in a creative arts program, and then to being so like joyfully inspired to participate as a facilitator of the education, right?
Yes.
Joining with,
Yes.
feeling with, dancing with.
Yes.
I deeply resonate with that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it really is an honor,
Yes.
you know.
Yes. I hold that space with such deep respect because, you know, I feel like when I think about people who are parents to small children, or even for when we were small children, people tend to, in general, of all walks of life, be very enamored with those first, you know, baby 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And in reality, I feel very connected to the aspect of inner child, you know, of us always being that child. We just stretch, right?
Yeah.
And so the witnessing aspect to that doesn't go away because we're no longer cute, right? So, you know, I think it's important to recognize in education and teaching that we are being allowed to witness people at particular milestones of their life
Yes.
that are not reversible, that are linear, that are spontaneous, and um, and know that some part of that relating is going to stay with them forever, and vice versa. You know, so I have a lot of respect for it. I mean, and I think as I'm saying this to you, I still remember my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Silverstein. I still remember my first grade teacher, Mrs. Piccioni, and Mrs. Carter, my second grade teacher. I mean,
yeah,
they were great teachers. They were great women. They were great people.
yeah.
They I will never forget them. So I feel like having that kind of nurturance and challenge is something that I want to bring into the classroom and in
Mhm.
education.
Yes, and that lineage of being part of school systems and being taught. It's hard to, sometimes I think that as educators, we forget that all of our students, or maybe I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
have forgotten about the lineage of education that each of my students have experienced. And
Yes.
some of that is really beautiful, right? Like you're
Yes.
sharing from remembering these women who clearly held you in a way that felt good.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's like folks who've had the opposite experience, right?
Yes.
For their
Yes.
whole, perhaps their whole school journey,
Yes.
or perhaps the interaction of being in school and coming home, code switching between these two spaces, and
Yes.
whatever that looked like, right?
Yes.
And I think that's another important piece that we either consciously or unconsciously hold as educators, is this
Yes.
lineage of education
Yes.
that just comes with all of our students and comes with us, right? We're just kind of
Yes.
holding all of this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so much of what you're saying too, I think about like the consciousness of that. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't think I was really conscious of that until we're having this conversation right now. I knew it in this internal sense, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when I'm in that room with them, and they're in that room with me, it is a continuation on a story, versus like the beginning of
Yes.
something, you
Oh,
know?
yeah, I love that. And it's a continuation of a story, and therein also is that honor, like you were talking about, where we get to be this, kind of important, sometimes really important,
Yes.
sometimes maybe just a blip, but like in this important part of their journey, we get to
Yes.
be a part of it,
It's
you
true.
know? Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, how would you describe your teaching frame? Like what's your agenda as a teacher? What are some of the explicit agreements or norms that you speak to with your
Yeah.
students?
I think that, well, the main thing is for my style of teaching is that it is very improv reliant, very
Mm,
spontaneous
mm,
reliant.
mhm,
I go into teaching, I teach on Wednesdays, a consistent class, and then I sub throughout the year. But, like,
mhm,
for instance, since this is a Monday, I've begun thinking about Wednesday's class since probably last night, and thinking about the topic, and I'm thinking, this is just my creative process. Like when I'm watching TV over the weekend, I went to the museum yesterday, I'm thinking about the topic and I'm bringing it with me in all these other ways of my life when I'm
right.
cooking and all that, because I'm investigating where that topic lives in the body for me,
Mm,
and how can I offer that experience in the classroom for others to identify where it might live in their body, so that it's not just this static experience of what's written or what was told or heard of, but
mm,
being able to really like concretely identify like what is my experience with this week's topic is theoretical perspectives, right? What is my experience with that?
mhm,
I use a lot of metaphors when I teach, a lot of relativity for understanding, so that again it's not just having to be interpreted as what is written or only what is created, but how might what's being proposed be better understood in someone's culture,
mhm,
better understood in someone's gender identity, better
right.
understood in someone's disability. What does that mean for them? um, I teach from a very, now this leans into the boundary piece, because I do have intent boundaries. Boundaries are really important to me. Um, I think because of my race, that the way boundaries might be experienced from me to others
Mm,
is, in a sense, non invitational, but that's not true.
mhm,
Um, I think that's the projected value on what it means to engage with Black women with strong boundaries. That has nothing to do with me, because in fact, I prefer to be challenged and questioned. I
mhm,
prefer to be leaned in toward. but a lot of times it takes a particular type of student to really go there. And I do have a rotating, a rotating feeling of joy. It rotates on the axis
Like
of
this.
joy. Some days it's like, what the hell?
Like, ah.
Yeah, right. This one, right? This is rotating, like, I'm inspired by those students who will press, because I want them to press, because because to me, education is the place for that. That is the place to not necessarily just take in what's given to you, but to challenge it too.
Yeah.
And also to learn how to be digested on the things that are static and are what they are, right? So I like a lot of fun in my space. I like a lot of decompression in my space, time, space. I think it's also important to offer acceptance. I offer acceptance in my classroom. However you are, whoever you are, whatever you are. And I say what, I mean whatever state of life, state of mind, whatever that is. Acceptance is something that I try to lead with, because I want students to have a feeling of belonging.
Yeah.
As they are.
Yeah.
Crying one day, angry the next, temperamental, cranky, happy, hyper, whatever.
Yep.
It's fine. Because I feel like we learn best in general as human beings when we feel safe. And acceptance to me is about feeling safe and welcome to be there.
So much in what you said. I'm gonna see if I can figure out where to go next. Gosh. So there's this piece around a safe enough space, which I think that word safety gets used in ways that it can be weaponized in our fields and in our educational system and higher ed for these fields, where teachers can assume safety of the class, and kind of feel entitled to student safety, which can be really problematic. And then this other piece, which I'm really grateful that you brought in, around your boundaries as a human and some of the projection that you've received as a woman of African descent, as a woman of Caribbean descent, in a space that I'm imagining in some of the spaces, like, because you're in New York, there's a lot more. This is an assumption, so tell me if I'm wrong. But my assumption is that the classrooms are a lot more diverse culturally than the classrooms in Santa Fe. That's my assumption. Tell me, am I wrong? I'm wrong.
You know what? The word wrong is so wrong for this.
Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm gonna go in lovingly and say we are in different times.
Okay.
We are in different times.
Okay.
I think I'm very surprised to see the racial composition of the classroom.
Okay.
It's not as diverse as I thought it would be, and the students tend to feel the same.
Yeah.
They come into the space and they're like, I thought this would have been more diverse.
Where is everybody?
It's not. And so to me, that even, not to veer off, but just to kind of go into that space of like the differentiation where it relates to race and culture, there's still some type of non-acceptance. Something's happening. What, I don't know. Whether that's non-acceptance based on the application, finance, maybe it's a communal non-acceptance of thinking I don't belong there. It could be a lot of different things. But no, the diversity is not there.
Okay, so would you say that the majority of your students are either white identifying or white passing?
White passing, white identifying, cisgendered.
Okay. And how about sexuality? Would you say that there is a mix of queer and hetero folks?
I would say there's more of a mix of queer and hetero.
Okay.
Yeah.
And neurodivergence and neurotypical?
And neurodivergence and neurotypical, yes.
Okay, more
But
of a...
racially seems to be the more, yes.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, I heard you say before how you were talking about representation.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that just it's just as important to have teachers of color as it
Yes.
is to have students of color,
Yes.
right? To have that kind of bilateral representation
Yes.
within the group.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%, because when we talk about belonging, the meeting that I was on prior to this meeting,
Mm-hmm.
I was sharing with my dance therapy supervisor that I've been able to kind of have a somatic sourcing of how I experience racism in my body.
Yeah.
And that's something that's new to me, and I appreciate it. But it's something that's a signaling that helps me navigate the world better. That I didn't really, that's been here. I just didn't know what to label it. And I was sharing with her that so much of how I see this work is through an ancestral, African Caribbean ancestral perspective that leads from the spirit, that leads from faith, that leads from looking at science and faith as one, not a separate. And, as a spiritualist and an educator, an academic, a professor, a clinical supervisor, all those things, it's important for me to lead with honesty when I'm in these spaces, in these education spaces. And I think that more of the ancestral call of people who are like myself or similar is to be able to, how can we get them physically in the room?
Yes.
Because the work that needs to be done, I feel like the anti-racist work that needs to be done in the classroom, in the institution, really starts with the people in the community, in the classroom. You need all the voices.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're still sitting in a margin. And there's nothing, and I also feel there's nothing wrong with that margin because it's useful. But what is important to impact the margin is honesty.
Yeah.
And I think that's the place that not having the physical numbers and representation affects so much, because quite frankly, if someone is racist, let's say, I don't have a problem with you or her or him or they. If you're racist, that's just something you're experiencing that probably needs more information, What I would want to see in the classroom is a representation of that, of naming of self, of naming the racism that's inside the body, that's inside the mind.
Yes.
Talking about my identity as a racist, right? And being informed and educated by your peers on their anti-racism or them being in between. Just more honest dialogue.
I love that. I can feel in my body the my experience with students and the anxiety of many white identifying students around honesty.
Yes.
Around speaking, around making mistakes, right? So perfectionism and that that internalized colonialism around how to show up right? Bringing right and wrong back in.
That's right.
Thank you.
That's right. But that's a part of that hierarchy. So, it's on task, right?
Yeah, it is on task. I feel like with the racialized conversations, that's not really the way I want to say, the racialized like soma, and how that shows up in the spaces.
Yes.
It takes a really nuanced and direct facilitation.
Yes.
Of being in conversation, right? So this place of, I am going to hold this space and be here, and I'm going to be flexible and move. I'm going to offer my nervous system, and I'm also going to ground myself in it as a facilitator. And I actually can't guarantee safety. Kind of back to what we were talking about before. I can't say, hey, this is a safe space, because it's really up to their nervous systems and their,
Yes.
mind process, whether they're safe
Yes.
or not.
That's
And
right.
and so it's this really interesting movement around, how do I include and challenge, right? So
Yes.
when something comes up in the classroom that is like, ooh, that's from a real deep place of bias, I believe it's my responsibility to, put a little, what is this, a flashlight on it,
Yeah. Yes.
in a way that's like, all right, come here,
Yes.
and we're gonna
Yes.
do this, but
Right.
we're here together,
Right.
you know.
Right. That's right. That
Hmm.
you that's that physical gesture is really, that really is the thing. And I think it's so interesting because when it really boils down to it, I'm hearing you say, and reliving and remembering in my own experience as a person and a professional, is this tolerance of our own emotional experiencing.
Mm,
It's
yes.
it's really just that simple. Like, how much can I tolerate of my own truth in the
Yeah.
company of other people?
Woo!
And that truth is sometimes hard to take on alone, much less in the sight of others in a classroom space.
Really, truly. Yeah, and that is where the belonging comes in, right? So
Yes.
if I feel like I belong here and I trust you, then maybe it's okay to
Yes.
not know everything.
That's right.
Maybe it's okay to actually be witnessed in
Yes.
realizing that I've got some work to do,
That's right. Yep.
and we all do. I mean, I
Yes.
think that is an important truth that I really try to weave in over and over
Yes.
and over again.
Yes. I agree 100%. And you saying that makes me think about something that I have to remind myself a lot of times in the education space and in the teacher space,
Mm,
is remembering how long the bridge is between where I am and where these students are going.
yes.
In one way, we're literally on the same piece of land, right? As humans, as
Mm,
beings,
hmm.
regionally, wherever we're from.
Mm,
But as far as the capacity for time to influence whatever is being taught on their life in person, the bridge is long,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And, I remember when I was getting my hours to become a licensed creative arts therapist, I there was many times I almost gave up a lot of times because it wasn't easy for me. I had to keep changing jobs. I had medical
Mm,
issues.
mm,
I'm neurodivergent myself. I have chronic illnesses that I live with.
mm,
PTSD is one of them.
mm.
It was a challenge. And so I quit. I almost quit many times. Then I would like get up and start again. And there's no amount of retelling, recanting, tests, books, nothing can go into that experience, in
Yeah.
place of that. And the same I think is reflective for students that are learning to become psychotherapists in, the field that I work in. And
Hmm.
it's like some of this stuff you're just going to have to go through your own experience and have the context of what we talked about in the classroom to relate it back to.
Absolutely. And I think when you were talking about, I'm not sure what the language was that you used, but it was really about being able to be in one's
Yes.
experience, right?
Yep.
The window of tolerance, being able to like expand that window of tolerance so as not to go over the edge and be
Yes.
overwhelmed, to feel
Yep.
like your body is being threatened, so nothing
Yes.
else, can come in.
Right.
And so I'm curious, how do you support your students in self-regulation and co-regulation? What does that look like in a dance movement therapy classroom,
Yeah.
or you as a facilitator?
Yeah. You're telling you this is all on time.
Yes, divine intervention.
It's so divine intervention. So at Sarah Lawrence, I teach the dynamics of group psychotherapy.
Mm,
And so it's a very dense, intense class.
yeah.
And, we're at the juncture right now where I'm going to start introducing them to trying to figure out their role within a group dynamic, right? So
Yes.
as conversation and emotion and conflict and all these things are happening, can you eternally dial into, am I a participant in this? Should I be a leader in this, or should I be a witness in this? Where do I belong in this? Right. And so the way that I can teach that is by having them embody it and holding the space I try to open the space with every day of like, you're here, or every day, every week of you're here. We're here together. This is where we are. You have a licensed and board certified therapist sitting in front of you who's also your educator, your professor. I'm not naming that for accolades. I'm naming that for your level of safety. There is nothing that's going to go on in this space that I will not be able to handle with you. And I end on the same, right? So just to like put it in plain language, boom, you are being navigated in a space that is contained. Grounding in the same way before we go home, right? Yes. And then last week, like it was a little bit of a dial turn up on tolerance, emotional tolerance, and just knowing that, well, there's a level of necessity that's needed for this because, you all want to become psychotherapists. You must be introduced to your own internal system, right? You're not surgeons. You're not operating on someone. You're the psych first, right? So kind of turning that dial up, and now I can feel into their rhythm and the rhythm of the group in my teacher body of like, okay, now it's time to do some co-regulation. And that co-regulation is going to start with this self-identity of who am I during these conversations. Sometimes you may have to step out the circle. Maybe you need to go in. Maybe you think you have something to offer to help. Let's begin, right? So to me, that's a sharing of authority and a sharing of power. Because I think when we feel and embody powerlessness, it's hard for us to feel regulated, right? So introducing them to this aspect of like, yes, I can drop down into my emotions and feel and see things for reality in a way that I may not have seen them before. And also, depending on the role that I decide that I'm in relationship to that, I can choose how to titrate these experiences of powerlessness, which is necessary, of helplessness, which is necessary, of directness, of boundary, of tolerance, of intolerance, all of that becomes, I think, more palpable as the group grows a little bit more. And sometimes it's as simple as I have a student that this semester and last year that I've shared with, I've seen them go through a little bit of internal cook-up in relationship to the content. And so I'll say, okay, sit next to me for class this week, and sit next to me for class next week. And every week we'll check in. How did sitting next to me feel for you, right? So that you have your independence. So I'm not hand-holding you, not because I wouldn't want to. Knowing me, I would, but I can't, right? I'm here to help you be independent, right? So, but I want you to feel adjacent to what's qualified to be here with you all in this way and who that person is. And that seems to work. That seems to help. Yeah, it really helps. It's like a non-invasive kind of like, yeah, you sit next to me.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I'm imagining how it could be perceived, right, if somebody's feeling insecure. And I also think about how it's used by teachers, across the ages, really, and I don't know if it's articulated in this way, but really to share the nervous system. To be
Absolutely.
like, sit next to me, feel me regulated, and let me help you regulate yourself, right?
Yes.
Oh,
absolutely.
It's so good. And that's also part of like I think, it's part of our responsibility as therapeutic educators, because we're not just educators, we're therapists.
Yes.
So it's a therapeutic educational experience, right? And so in my belief system, part of our responsibility is to be able to track what's happening with our students, and then to do this, like to enter
Yes.
into
Yep.
relationship to help them,
Yes.
and not all students want it,
Yep.
you
Oh yeah.
know,
Oh
and
yes.
that can
My
show up.
evaluations have shared that with me.
Like what is it that they share?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's different ways I recognize of students being able to be so enmeshed with their powerlessness to not be able to
Ooh,
identify it,
I love that.
but opposed to identifying it, they project it onto,
Yes.
right? So my invitation is, wherever you feel I'm short or could do better, come and tell me. I'm not going to challenge you. This is your experience. This is your classroom,
Yeah.
right? I'm here to listen. Whether I respond or not doesn't even matter. I'm inviting you to tell me your
Yes.
thoughts,
Yes.
right? But that seldom occurs.
Yes.
Like I said before, right? I have the outliers that I deeply appreciate who will say things like, but why? Yes, here's why, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
how come, or I feel this, and sometimes what they feel is like offensive in general, but not offensive necessarily. Sometimes it is actually offensive in general and also offensive directly as it relates to race,
Mm.
right? But also not something that's not teachable. So I appreciate it. How can we look at this and like expand it? What are other people's thoughts on this?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And having this person again, like sit next to me. You're not being picked on. You're not being isolated. You do need to sit in the rawness of these feelings, but also hear the voices that reflect what you're saying and
Mm.
how they sound, because they're not all going to sound the same.
Yes.
Right. So I think that it's just really like this dance of like, when is it useful for the belonging? And when is it useful for a boundary? That's
Mm-hmm.
really what I realized, right? Sometimes it's useful for the belonging because some of these other students have the same thoughts and feelings. They're just not going to say it.
Yep.
Some are going to wait until the evaluation and say it. And it's like,
True.
come on, I wish you could have told me this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And others are just they're just gonna offer it one way or another. And I think that however it shows up, I think it adds to the boundary and the belonging pieces.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I imagine that you are an incredible model for direct communicate, like compassionate direct communication. Like that's my
Hmm.
imagining.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I love what you're bringing in because all of our students they're all on their own journeys, different paces, different life experiences, and really very different capacities to be in relationship. Because what I hear you saying is really like this is a relational experience that's
Yes.
incredibly intimate.
Yes.
That
Yep.
an intimacy, as we know, brings up all of our attachment wounds, and
Yes.
that happens in the classroom.
Yes.
And you can feel it. I mean, I can feel it as a teacher where,
Yes.
oh, I hit up against something. And
Yes.
some students, unfortunately, at least it feels unfortunate because then
Yes.
I've had the experience of really like, okay, something happens and I want to figure out how to make a repair or let's like let it
Yes.
rise. And
Yes.
not all people want to do that work. Not all people
Yeah.
want to let it rise and
Yeah.
feel into it and then kind
Yeah.
of let it dissipate.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
unfortunate. And then, of course, there are so many students who do. There are so many students
Yes.
who will be like, Magdalena, when you said this, it like tore my heart open. When you
Yes.
misgendered me, I
Yes.
felt so unseen and
Yes.
like all of the work that I've done was gone, right? And
Yes.
oof, when that happens, I'm like, thank you and fuck, like
Yes.
thank
Yes.
you and
Yes.
okay, I can
Yes.
see, thank you for the mirror. I have some
Yes.
work to do with you, you
Right.
know?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, oh, it's yeah, the teaching space is just I can only imagine teaching in graduate, because I feel like at that point, my assumption is that the imagery I get is almost like a corset. I feel like the bones are a little more upright and functional by that point in life. Whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it doesn't matter, right? By the time you get to a place where you want to pursue a graduate degree, some part of you is like, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm making that comparison because I would be probably an awful pre-K or kindergarten teacher, because I I love them so much. I love small children so much that I would be like, do whatever you want. Do whatever you want, you know? But yeah, I feel like there's just so much for an individual to consider when putting themselves in the position to be a graduate student, and to say that I have a pursuit, and then open yourself up to be taught the different ways that this pursuit can look, and from different perspectives that may not mirror anything like you're accustomed to, and have that willingness to be engaged. And I agree with you. I think it is unfortunate when I come across students that don't take the dive.
Yeah.
Because really, I mean, I took the dive, so that it's probably, maybe I'm biased, I don't know, but I think that you know, taking that dive, it unveils a completely new world
Oh yeah.
to the person. And I know it has this feeling, it feels personal, but it's really not. It's not about me. It's totally about you as the student, and taking advantage of this opportunity to be fully seen, fully witnessed, fully heard, fully challenged, bound, like all of it, right? And not judged at all for whatever goes on in there. And, you know, I think that I've been guest teaching for a few years, but as far as having like my own consistent class, this is my second school year of that.
Yay.
And thank you. But I look forward to seeing how it goes as I move forward, because I think one of the biggest things that I think gets in the way for me in the classroom is it's race related. I wish it wasn't, in a way, because I feel like, you know, I have to, for my protection and my safety, I have to align with my authority.
Yes.
I have to do that.
Wow.
And I can share that authority with you, but then the basis for that is about a respect that is only navigated and deemed or approached as we relate, right? So I have to keep myself protected, because even some of the institutions themselves, they're racist.
Yes. I mean,
You know,
the truth.
so yeah, it's challenging, you know, because on one end, I could feel that tension for students. Sometimes they want to get close, but again, their own racial ambiguity and in relationship to whether it's my physical identity or the known identity of my race and culture, it creates fright for which they're not willing to be honest about.
Wow. That's so
And
deep.
that, yeah, it's really deep. And I think that's unfortunate too, only because it's just another opportunity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Take the opportunity.
Yeah.
So.
Oof. Real. Yeah. I love hearing how centered you are in knowing that you are important, you know, as a human and as an educator, and that your authority as you is just as important as a student's authority as them.
Yes.
Right. And
yes.
that is also really incredible modeling, I think. And not everybody's going to like that, because again, it's boundaries,
Yes.
right? It's
yes,
like,
it is. That's right.
why can't you fold for me?
Yes.
Why can't you just do it this way? Because that's what makes me feel more comfortable. And as we know, I mean, I love comfort. Don't get me wrong. I'm a Taurus. Like, I'm all about comfort.
Yes.
And I also know that personally that it's been through trials by fire. It's been through discomfort in relationships where we have had the capacity to sit in the discomfort and
That's right.
be loving.
Yes.
And like, woof, God, that work, that's just the work. Like I am okay. I'm actually
Yes.
not being threatened in this moment, you know?
Yes.
Ooh, it's real work. And the thing is, we
Yes.
can do it.
Yes.
You know, it's just that
Yes.
practice. So
That's
much of
right.
this is practice and like really
Yes.
building the stamina and the capacity to be in relationship with discomfort that
Absolutely.
has a history
Yes.
of violence,
Yes.
genocide, and yuck,
Yes.
like just straight up
Yes.
yuck that has been inherited in the walls of the
Yes.
schools
Yes.
interpersonally. And I
Yes.
mean, I think, can we say that there are schools that are not steeped in white supremacy? I don't know that we can say that.
I don't know.
You know,
I don't know. That's a great question. Yeah.
you know, I'm curious.
100%.
I'm curious about so when we're talking about this really important conflict, interpersonal conflict around seeing, like trying to see each other, but seeing through, you know, pain or seeing through bias. Um, it brings up conflict, right?
Yes.
In the group and inside, whether it's inside the student or inside the facilitator. And I
Yes.
imagine also it brings up heartache, you know, and
Yes.
one of the things that just feels important to hold is that heartache and heartbreak are part of the group process, you know,
Yes.
whether it's specifically related to the interpersonal or if it's something that's being brought in, you
Yes.
know, from like a
Yes.
breakup to a
Yep.
parent to a loss,
Yep.
whatever. So
Yep.
how do you see it? How does heartache and heartbreak come up in your spaces as an educator,
Yeah.
and how do you move with it?
I think when my mind goes specifically to a student, two, one, two, three. It's about, well, I had a big class last year, but my mind is going specifically to maybe about 4 or 5 students from last year, and now so far about 2 students this year so far who have been willing to drop into their own defeat, their own heartbreak,
Mm.
their own fright.
Yeah.
Um, on my end, I try to facilitate a lot of movement
Mm.
to support that.
Oh, tell me.
And the movement would be like, I mean, I love all kinds of music, but specifically somatically, I love jazz. For me really does, and I mean like across the ages, jazz from like, you know, very early to modern. I think that there's something about the improv of jazz music that speaks to the soul and the somatic resonance of us as people. And you know, generally, I would play jazz and allow space and time for just witnessed and unwitnessed movement. It depends on the day. Maybe sometimes people want to be seen or not, but just giving people the opportunity to be together and have movement in the ways that they need is often really helpful with that process, because again, you know, I think I know I take it for granted. I take for granted how second nature this work is to me. So I forget that like the rest of the world is not speaking in these terms.
Like, and moving and just kind of like, let's just move that shit out. Yeah.
You know what I mean? The rest of the world is not like crying when they teach. I cry sometimes when I
Yeah,
teach. It's fine. It's like
totally.
whatever, you know.
It's part of it.
It's part of it. So I think this invitation for people to just let what is be there and know that it's okay. I say it's okay a lot. I will say that. And I do also ask students, is it okay if I put my hand on your hand? Or is it okay if I put my hand on your back? Is it okay if I sit next to you? I would say like those are the things that I do the most. Um, And I think also because I do care, I'm a carer in general. People, play, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I can walk outside and care. I go to training care. I'm just like that, you know.
Care.
I really want to know my students or the students. See, I just like own them. I really want to know students personally too, not their personal business, but like a personal relative professional relationship. And so I think that I want to be able to be sometimes the good enough mother in the teaching space. Not always, but specifically when they're like cooked up emotionally.
Yep.
To know that, you know what, she doesn't like to be touched when she's in that space, and reminding the group of that as a support to her, you know, or they don't like direct eye contact when they're upset. So please remember, let's just lower our eyes and listen to them, right? Like just trying to not be invasive and step and offer, if I am, please tell me to back up.
Yeah.
And also like have this really wide shot of like, uh-oh, something tragic is about to happen. We're going to do an experiential right now to divert the energy. It's very interesting. It's like, I feel like a pilot in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Navigating storms and low visibility.
Yes. Sometimes I don't need any instruction on the instruments, and then other times it's like tower, coming. Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. So that brings me to kind of this, it's similar. It's like, you know, I'm really interested in what emerges, right? What emerges from the group process, from the spontaneous, creative group process that is facilitated with finesse and nuance.
Yes.
And yet the third emerges, right? This new knowing, this new form, this new sound or movement, whatever it is. And I guess I'd love to hear about your thoughts about emergence and the third and what can come through in this ceremony. Like, I mean, is ceremony, this work is, right? Okay.
That's a word.
You know.
Yes, it is. Yeah, no, it is very ceremonious. I think what I've witnessed and what feels like true to me is these new identities that have resolved with the former. So a lot of self-acceptance, a lot of self-realization, a lot of self-patience, a lot of listening. I love to witness that new emergence for students. I love to witness students like come out at the other end and be like, wow, I'm picking up the pieces that you've modeled and laid down about listening and not knowing when to, maybe this is not the time for words, or, you know, maybe I need to exit the group circle, stay in the room, but exit the circle. Maybe my presence is agitating what's happening. Wow. You know, really like these internal, their own internal pilot. I think that's the third. It's like their own internal pilot that becomes, yes, a part of them, but similar to my experience where I look at this work like ceremony and ritual, it's this passing on of what is like devout and a part of, to me, your soul and your work in the world. Yeah. It's that voice that gets created to show you how to do your work. It's that I made this one day. I painted this little hand, you know, and like I'm looking at it while I'm talking to you, but it's like this emergence of this part, you know, like I have access to this inner tool now that can respond to a crisis, can respond to joy, can respond to ambivalence, can respond to chaos. You know, I mean, I was recently on a train coming home from work, and sadly, a man, he didn't pass, but he had a heart attack on the train. And so they had to put the train out of service until the EMS could come. But they made an announcement and said, if we have any medical professionals on the train, can you please come to the first car? And it was the first time I think I heard that, and my ears cued into it, because I was like, oh, I'm included in that, right? And depending on the kind of emergency it is, I am a medical professional who can respond in the way that that hand needs to emerge. And I think just being able to facilitate spaces where people can discover that for themselves, to me, that's just super profound. Because, as much as the people in our lives love us and the communities that we have, if we have the honor of being a part of them, care for us, or whoever raised us, listen, everyone doesn't have the time and space to give us that, right? We got to sometimes go out and literally pay for it. So
True.
run it up. You got to run that money up to
Yep.
get it. And so, I feel like really having the space and the opportunity to create an identity of self that is useful in more than one way in the world, and unique to who you are as well. I think that that's really what I see emerging for students. And I'm again honored to be able to be a part of that.
Amen. Amen to that. Absolutely. And it's kind of like what you did just there was you went full circle, you back to identity and how important it is to be in oneself and to be oneself and to trust oneself.
Yes.
Without that, I can't see you. I can't trust you if I can't trust me,
That's right.
Oh,
yep.
So good.
And that's the longevity. I feel, like, because I know we're coming up on a close, but I really feel like the longevity of the work that we do, it has to include this type of knowledge that's not mine. It's, for me, again, it is an ancestral push that I regard, right? That to commune and communicate, care, compassion, like, it's preposterous for me to want to offer someone that space as a therapist, but I don't know how to facilitate it. It is in support of racism to continue to work that way. Right. And so I think that I'm honored also to have the position I have and the time that I have it, so that I can bring that into my teaching style. And it won't resonate with everyone, and that's fine. But the people that it does resonate for, or the ones that it doesn't, and maybe it manifests later on, I think that this is how we create a new beginning, new entry, a new tolerance that is harmony, really, and accepting of things we like and don't like. And it's okay.
That's right.
So I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing. I'm at peace, and I am very, very grateful for the role that I have at this time.
I mean, that is so clear. And, it's been a real honor to be in conversation with you today. I'm grateful for the inspiration.
Likewise, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Boundaries and Belonging podcast, an arts-based approach. Please tune in, subscribe, follow. We're on Instagram at Boundaries Belonging Podcast. I want to thank today's guest for their wisdom, laughter, and movement, and also a big thanks to my brother Gabriel Karlick, who's in charge of the music. See you soon, and keep creating.